What is the most creepiest thing that has happened to you? Story 1. Before I begin, I must first explain that while you might think my stories creepy, I find them very comforting. Additionally, all of the instances I will describe have occurred within the past year, from April 2016 to the present, March 2017, and there is no indication they will stop. Frankly, I hope they don't. The love of my life, my beautiful, brilliant, feisty wife, passed away mid-April 2016 at the age of 32. Her loss was absolutely unfathomable to me. That someone so young, so vibrant could be taken from this world in an instant, and that the one person I have ever truly, completely loved could be stripped from me was more than I could bear. I can't, for the life of me, remember what happened that first day after her death, only the excruciating pain and the sense that time was moving at a snail's pace, with every aching second seeming to take an eternity to pass. On the second day, things changed. My mother came to visit me at my home in the morning. I had told her I wanted to be alone, but frankly, I'm surprised she waited as long as she did to drop in. She couldn't console me, couldn't distract me, and she soon left me, as that was what I said I wanted. I watched through a window as she drove away, and stood there watching another 10 minutes to make sure she would not be coming back. I walked downstairs, removed a clean sheet of paper from an open ream in my basement office, sat at my desk and wrote a letter apologizing to my parents, siblings and friends for what I was about to do, for leaving them all behind of my own accord, and for being such a coward as to do so. I apologized for being so weak, for not being able to live now that my love was gone. I explained that I wanted nothing more than to be with her, and that if causing my own death was to be the only way for us to be together, then so be it. I signed the letter, folded it neatly in thirds, and placed it in an envelope atop my desk so it would be easily found. I then walked to the utility room, found a brand new 30-foot length of 1/1/2 jute rope, and proceeded to tie the first and only noose I have ever tied. For having had no experience tying such a knot, nor having any reference guide on how to tie it in the moment, I was surprised at how effortlessly I tied it, as if I had done it a million times before. I looped the noose 3 times over an exposed beam in the basement and secured the free end to an adjacent beam. I stood upon a step ladder, looped the noose around my neck and snugged it against my skin until I felt the pressure upon my windpipe. I lifted my left foot from the step stool, then forcefully kicked the stool away with my right, and I began to hang. My toes barely grazed the Berber carpet underneath, and I began to feel faint, the pressure building in my head as the life was slowly choked from me. And then, "You stupid fuck. Don't you know what you're doing? You selfish shit. I'm not letting you fucking do this." Hearing my wife's voice screaming at me, I figured it was nearly over, that I was either hallucinating from severe oxygen deprivation, or that I was closer to death, and there she was coming to get me, albeit totally pissed off at me, not an uncommon occurrence, and spouting obscenities as was her norm. Either way, I figured I was almost dead, and if it really was her yelling at me, then I'd gladly take an eternity of that over the next several decades living life without ever again hearing her voice. But I came to find myself laying on the floor of the basement, desperately gasping for air. The noose was still around my neck, but the bulk of the pressure had been relieved. As my blurred vision began to clear, I looked up to see the frayed end of the rope dangling above me. It had broken. A virgin length of heavy rope that should have held many times my meager weight had broken under my 170 pounds, and as I regained my breath and picked up my fall-bruised body from the floor, I heard her again. This time, she wasn't yelling. "You're not ready yet, baby, but I'll be here when you are." I collapsed to the floor again, sobbing, begging her to speak to me once more, begging her not to leave, begging her to come back, but that would be the last time I'd heard her. When I composed myself, I untied what remained of the rope from the rafters and placed it and the letter in the garbage bin outside. We had our memorial 5 days later, with the reception after held at our home. After the last guests left, I climbed into our bed, exhausted in my grief. As I began to drift off, the numbness of sleep beginning to overtake my body, I felt something, the opposite side of the bed, her side, moved, as if someone had sat upon it. My eyes began to open, and before I could turn my head to look, I felt a slight weight upon my chest. The weight of her head upon my chest exactly where she would lay her head every night as we went to sleep. Again, I began to sob, whereas by this time, I had rationalized that the failed suicide incident was nothing more than a combination of hypoxia and a faulty rope. I now knew that it was something else. I knew it was her, really her, and I knew she wasn't going to go anywhere. Not without me, anyway. While I'm sure this may make me appear crazy, or likely brain damaged from my botched hanging attempt, may I add this to the mix? I'm not the only one who experiences my wife's ghostly charms. Friends and relatives who have stayed overnight in my home have spoken of hearing footsteps in the hall in the dead of night, unless I've started sleepwalking, but it's not me, of seeing strange, disembodied shadows moving around fully lit rooms, and of having small items go missing for short times only to end up where they were supposed to be minutes later. My mother, while searching her purse for her missing cell phone, has had it tossed into her lap not once, but on 3 different occasions while she was the only person in my house, and my neighbor's 4-year-old daughter has asked me twice about the pretty painted lady with white hair. My wife was nearly covered in tattoos and was a bleach blonde, who smiles and waves at her from the picture window, and my neighbors moved into their home only last month. So is this my wife sticking around, proving that, until death do we part, isn't always the case? Is this proof of an afterlife, or is it nothing more wishful thinking and coincidence, and possibly breaking and entering, as would be the case with the then unknown woman in my house waving at my neighbor's little girl? I'll be the first to say that I don't know for certain, but I certainly hope it is her. If it is, I hope she keeps laying in bed with me at night and stomping around the halls and hiding my car keys in the freezer, so she could be a bit of a shit sometimes. Because if nothing else, being a non-believer is boring. Story 2. I was home alone one day, and was thirsty, so I opened a cabinet to take out a glass to drink some water. As soon as I touched the glass, it literally exploded into thousands of tiny fragments. Needless to say, at that impressionable age, about 14, I freaked out. It was only a few years later, being more rational and mature, that I figured it out. My parents had commissioned a new cabinet, which was wooden. It was recently finished, and had a layer of varnish that had apparently not completely dried out. I had been walking about barefoot with socks, picking up static electricity. My mother always placed the glasses upside down, so that dust wouldn't settle in them, allowing the fumes from the varnish to build up. As soon as my charged body touched the glass filled with apparently volatile fumes from the varnish, BOM. So yes, it freaked me out then. But everything can be explained logically at the end of the day. Story 3. Creepy? You judge. It doesn't feel creepy to me, but it might to you. At 18, I was sitting in my bedroom, studying for my A-level exams. My father suddenly walked into my bedroom, said, "I hope you are revising aluminium. Aluminium is going to come up in that exam," and left the room. I had actually been studying maths at the time, but I decided to take the hint and study aluminium. Fast forwards about 3 weeks to my chemistry written exam. I opened the paper and did my normal practice of reading all the questions, highlighting the ones that I thought were a possibility, and scribbling a few notes. About halfway down the questions was a short one, probably no more than 2 lines, which was something like, "Describe the sources, properties, extraction, and uses of aluminium." That was it. Most of the other questions were a lot longer, and asked much more specific things. I was a bit shaken, but I marked that as one of my 4 long questions, each worth 20% of the marks, and at the end of the read-through I returned to the start, which was about 10 or 12 short questions, each worth 1 to 3%, totaling 20%. Well, obviously I answered the aluminium question, and passed the A-level chemistry written exam, and also the practical exam. So what was creepy? My dad had an inkling about what was a good thing to study, and gave me a hint. So far, no big deal. Except that he had died 4 years earlier. That's it. I saw my dead father, who told me what I should revise for my chemistry exam, and the hint was correct. I don't think it was creepy. It certainly never felt creepy at the time, just somewhat strange. I mentioned what had happened to a friend at the time, but she just said that I must have fallen asleep and dreamed it all. If I did, he still gave me the right topic, but I was as awake as I am now, and he was as real to me that day as everything in this room. Story 4. I've got a laundry list of things that I could put on here, but I'll stick with this one. This happened around 2008, while I was dating an ex who came from an affluent family. Her mother ended up remarrying someone whose children were descendants of a founding father and presidents on their late mother's side. I will not provide any further information other than that, since I do not wish to give away anything that would identify them, but their heritage is somewhat relevant to the story. My ex and I traveled up to Boston for her stepsister's wedding. The wedding took place on an island in the Boston Harbor at an ancestral home dating back to the early 19th century, at least. It had been passed down from the aforementioned president generation to generation, until my ex's step-brother and sisters. The house was beautiful with as much history as one would imagine, and big enough to be a modest hotel. To make this easier to type, I will just call my ex-girlfriend Jane, not her real name. I will detail the layout of the room, because it's somewhat important to understand the story. Since Jane and I were not married or engaged, we were to stay in different rooms. She was given a room just down the hall from me, and I was to stay in a guest room. The guest room was a long, rectangular room, with a long outside wall facing the driveway to the house. To get to this room, you would walk up the steps with a wall to your right, and once you got to the top, in front of you would be Jane's room. To get to my room, you would have to turn left, making a U-turn, and walk down a long hallway that ran alongside of the stairway. That long hallway culminated in a pair of doors, one to your right and one in front of you. The room I was staying in was the big, long room to the right. As soon as I got to the room, I was immediately uneasy. There was something off about the room that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and that's not normal. I'm about 6'3" and hover somewhere between 210 to 240, and I've never been accused of being overweight, to give you an idea of my body type. I don't say that to brag, but to emphasize a point. It takes a lot to make me uncomfortable. At the age of 12, I was able to go hunting on my own. When you go hunting, you get to your stand long before dawn, so that you're ready to watch for movement by first light. Again, I only say this to emphasize a point. I'm comfortable walking alone so deep into the woods that I can take a shot and feel comfortable that I won't hit anything or anyone unintentionally. That's not to mention every other crazy thing that's happened in my life. I don't spook easily, but this room gave me the creeps. However, that is not what this story is about. It got a lot creepier. The beds rested against was the opposite side of the hallway wall, so the windows faced the feet of the beds. Each bed lined up with a window, so if you sat up and looked straight ahead, you'd peer out at the bay. There were nightstands between all of the beds, and if I'm being honest, the room was much less homey than the photo above. It was decorated pleasantly enough, but reminded me more of a mix between a 1940s communal hospital and a modern communal hostel room. The feature that really made this room so creepy, though, was the wall of mirrored closets. If you were the photographer that took the picture above, the wall of mirrored closets would be behind you. If you lay down in the beds, the wall of mirrors would be to your left. There were 3 or 4 other beds in the room, but I was the only person staying in there. Keep that fact in mind. We arrived halfway through the day. I put my stuff in the room and decided to take a nap. It was a long day, and we had a few hours before dinner, so I laid down on the bed closest to the door. I figured I just had to get used to the room. I thought it was the layout that kept giving me the creeps, so naturally if you spend some time in there, you'll get used to it. The problem is that every time I neared sleep, I'd hear the groom's nephews laughing and running around. I hadn't even heard them arrive, but they must have been in the hallway behind the bed, because I could hear them clear as day. After about 2 hours of this, I decided to just read for the next hour. Jane came in about a half hour later to wake me up and take a walk around the island. When we got back, the groom's brother, as well as his children, pulled in and began unpacking. It took a few minutes for this to register. Who the hell did I hear laughing and running around? I was completely creeped out, and Jane noticed. She asked me what was wrong, and I couldn't really find the words to say, so I just told her that the room was creeping me out and that I was tired. I asked her if there were any other kids staying in the house, and she told me that there would be, but none had arrived yet. When it was time for dinner, I sat near a friend of the family who visited the house often. Jane eventually told her that I was scared of that room, much to my chagrin. This woman, I can't remember her name, so I'll call her Denise, told me that I wasn't the first person to be creeped out by the room. Denise said that it's not everyone, but some people feel so strongly uneasy that they refuse to stay in that room. I've seen some creepy stuff, but you can always find a way to justify creepy things after the fact. Logically, I knew there was no such thing as ghosts or lingering spirits. However, I kept wondering if anything untoward had ever happened in room. I wanted to know more about the island and the house, but specifically that damned room. This curiosity eventually surpassed my desire to not sound like an idiot, so I asked Denise if anyone had ever died in the room. She started to say something, but thought better of it and replied in the negative. It was pretty clear that Denise was just trying to comfort me. She told me that she doesn't like that room, but there was no reason for it. She said that no one had even died on the island. I asked around about the history of the house and the island. One person told me something to the effect that it was used to treat sick children once, and another told me of a time that the island flooded during a storm. If either of these stories were valid, Denise had lied and people had died in the area. That only made me a little more uneasy, until logically, I told myself that she was just trying to shield me from something that could freak me out. If you don't think you should be scared, then you won't be. If you think there's something to be afraid of, then you'll be afraid. After a little, while we all decide to hit the hay, I decided that there's nothing wrong, but even if there was, I couldn't do anything about it. So I laid down and started reading, hoping to distract myself long enough to pass out. I had a light turned on to my left, between me and the door, and thus the wall of mirrors, so that I could read my book. Right as I started to nod off, I heard the laughter and running again, unmistakable in its clarity. When I turned to look at the rest of the room, the light on the nightstand went out. In the darkness, I heard something scuttling around at the far corner of the room, all the way to my right. I shifted left to turn the light back on, but when I did, I couldn't miss what I saw in the reflection of that wall of mirrors I was facing. There were people laying in the other beds of that room. They were all laying down, flat on their backs, arms to their sides like they had just passed away. At least one looked like a child. I quickly put my glasses on and shifted to my right to look at the beds without the aid of the mirror. No one was there. I stopped to catch my breath and take a minute. I told myself that the laughter and running was just me shifting into the unconscious. I told myself that the light must have just gone out on its own, since it's an old house. I told myself that, since I didn't have my glasses on when I looked at the wall of mirrors, I must have been seeing things incorrectly. I closed my eyes and tried to tell myself all of this, but after a few seconds, I heard the laughter again. I was sitting straight up at this point, so when I opened my eyes, I was facing those windows. I had my glasses on now, and in the reflection of those windows I could clearly see a person in each of the beds, except now they were all sitting up and looking at me. This time, when I turned to look at them, boom, 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 all of the mirrored closet doors slammed open at once. I jumped out of bed and nearly crapped myself. I was expecting someone to burst out of those mirrors. How else would they have slammed open like that? After a few seconds of nothing happening, I looked back at the beds. Again, no one was there. By this point, I was scared shitless. I had so much adrenaline pumping through me that I could hear my own heart beat, but there was nothing there. Everything was quiet. Jane came to my room to scold me for running around and slamming doors in the middle of the night, and it took her a minute to realize that I wasn't putting up a fight or trying to defend myself. I must have looked like the shades I was convinced I had just seen, because after a few seconds of ranting, she trailed off and asked me what was wrong, and that I was really freaking her out. I told her it was nothing, not wanting to scare her. I told her that I'd be staying in her room tonight, though. She was a little worried we would get in trouble, but didn't protest too much. I told her I'd sleep on the hard floor and sneak out in the morning if it would make her more comfortable. She agreed before those last conditions, but I hadn't even noticed. I told her to go back to her room so that I could get changed, get my book again, straighten up the room, and close those closet doors. I told her that I'd be in after a few minutes. I went about fixing up the room. Apparently I had thrown the blanket off when I jumped out of bed and made a mess. I looked around and eventually started closing the closet doors. I was convincing myself it was all in my head until I got to the last set of closet doors, closets to the windows. As I shut the last pair of doors, I looked up in the mirror to see them again. They were all standing at the far corner of the room, just out of the range of the nightstand light. Of course, when I turned to look at them, no one was there. I grabbed my stuff and went to Jane's room. I only stepped back in that room to get a change of clothes. I rarely tell that story, unless I'm really comfortable with someone. I thought about posting it anonymously, but screw it. Hopefully I don't offend anyone from that family. Post note: the family didn't care that I didn't spend my nights in that room. I think the rest of the family knew there was something weird about that room. They were extremely warm and welcoming, and we had a great time at the wedding despite the lack of sleep and uneasiness. If any of them end up reading this and wish me to take it down, since it pertains to their vacation home, I gladly will and did not intend any offense. I doubt it though, since I haven't spoken to any of them in about a decade. Also, I've since forgotten which island it was, but even if I did remember, I will not give any more info about it, in respect to the family. It's a very private place, and I believe they intend to keep it that way. Story 5. During my sophomore year of college, I moved to an apartment. It was a small private development with about 20 ground-level apartments lined down both sides of a street to a cul-de-sac. We paid the owner by mail, and the only other employee was a maintenance guy named Roy. Roy would often be around doing odd chores, cutting the grass, or taking care of the pool. He was friendly and often engaged residents in conversation. Just usual small talk. The first time I got creeped out was when we were planning a keg party at the apartment. It was coming up Friday night. Roy was out by the pool earlier in the week and struck up a conversation. He made a comment, "If you are going to throw a party, make sure they don't throw a bunch of trash around the pool that I have to clean up." I figured the invited guest had run their mouth and thought nothing of it. It bothered me that he knew something, but he seemed cool about it. One night we were wrestling and accidentally put a foot through the plaster. It left a big 6-inch hole in the wall. We had a friend who could come patch it. I was taking the garbage down and saw Roy. He started talking and said, "You need to get that hole fixed? I can come by and do it." "What hole?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The one you knocked in the wall horseplaying," he said. I was livid. One of my roommates had snitched us out. I told him to come by any time. I even agreed to pay him $40 for fixing it. My roommates all denied telling him. I knew someone had because he knew about the hole. We all started comparing stories and discovered that Roy had caused similar weird WTH moments amongst us all. One guy related how he knew his sister's name though she had never been there to visit. Another said he asked him about a particular brand of CD player. It's been a few years. He was using that he didn't even know the brand name of until he went back and looked at the player. One day as I was sitting on the toilet dropping the Browns off at the pool, I got an eerie feeling of being watched. I looked up at the cover where the fan that had never worked since we moved in was, and through the grill grates, I saw a set of eyes looking back at me. I blinked in disbelief, and they were gone. I finished up and went outside to the attic access point. Roy met me as I was walking around the building. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. I knew he was the culprit. I didn't know what to say. I figured it was my word against his. I didn't say a word. I went back to my apartment and told my roommates. We covered the vent with a piece of cardboard. A couple days passed, and I saw Roy leaving the apartments. I got my roommate, and we raced around to the attic entrance. I wanted to see how much he could see. Upon entering, I found an elaborate plank walking board that took you all over the attic. All of our apartments were connected. I could go in any direction, and there was a place to spy on the apartment below. I quickly realized that no one's fan worked because they had all been removed. Story 6. All the clocks and watches in our house stopped at the same time. This was almost 2 years ago. My brother, mom, and I were watching TV, and my dad was off to work. I glanced at the wall clock. It was 9:35 p.m. The conversation among the three of us went like this. "Me, Mom, it's past 9:30. Papa isn't back from work. You called him?" "Mom, yes, I did. He'll be home in 15 minutes. "Brother," glancing at his phone, "it's 10 p.m., not 9:30. "Me," looking at my wristwatch, "No, it's 9:35, see?" "Brother," glancing at my watch, "the second hand has stopped. Your watch is broken, bro." "Me," glancing at the wall clock, then back to mine, a bit creeped out now. Maybe the batteries gave out. I got up and went to my room and sat on my chair on the side of my desk. Just then, a chill ran down my spine. The table clock had also stopped at 9:35 p.m. I got back up and briskly walked into the guest room to take a look at the wall clock there. 9:35 p.m. again. I almost ran down to the drawing room, seeing that my dad was back and talking to Mom. "Mom, how did it get so late?" "Dad, my watch broke. I went to the repair shop at around 10, but it was closed. On my way back, I thought of buying some things for the kids, so it took time." "Me, Papa, show me your watch, please." "Dad," hands over the watch to me. It was working fine. I don't know how it stopped working. I gasped. 9:35 p.m. again. I told everything to my mom and dad, but they calmed me down and reacted like I was trying to play a prank on them. After half an hour of convincing, they seemed to believe me, and their expressions turned from calm to serious. They were trying to be calm, but you could see that on their face. They asked me and my brother to take the mattresses to their room and sleep there tonight. I couldn't sleep almost all night, terrified by the incident. When the sun rose and I woke up from the short nap I could manage to take, I was utterly surprised to see all the clocks and watches working absolutely fine and at the right time. I asked Mom, Dad, and my brother if anyone had changed the batteries or something, but they were as surprised as I was. I don't believe in ghosts, afterlife, and stuff like that, but I couldn't find any rational explanation to all the clocks stopping at the same time. Story 7. I don't know if it's the creepiest thing that ever happened to me, but I found this to be really creepy. I met a woman on Match about 10 years ago, and we went out for lunch in Providence on Federal Hill. She was very quiet, and I was sure she didn't care much for me. It was quite a bit of work to get her to speak about anything, and by the end of the evening, I chalked it up to experience, a wasted effort. But after lunch, she told me she was frightened of Providence and asked me to walk her to her car. I agreed. When we got to her car, she shook my hand and thanked me, and as an afterthought, asked me if I wanted a ride back to my car. She felt she could trust me now. I said okay. As soon as I got in the car, she was all over me. She wanted to make out hot and heavy. I didn't even get a chance to put on the seat belt. I was incredibly and pleasantly surprised. We made plans for another date. We went to the movies. Again, she was very quiet and standoffish until we got to her car. Then she was all over me. The next day I came home from work, and when I opened my mailbox, I found a small package. Inside were 2 wedding rings with the note, "We are destined to be one," on in the box. There was no postage. Whoever put it there in person. I suspected it was her, and I was uneasy. I called her up. She asked me if I got her package. I said yes. She said, "I went to my psychic. She said you were my soulmate. We'll be forever together." I realized then that she was not right in the head. I said, I don't think so." And after a discussion of how inappropriate she was being, I hung up the phone. The next day when I came home from work, she was parked in my driveway. I got out of the car, furious. "Who the hell do you think you are, coming to my house uninvited?" I asked her angrily. She was nonplussed. "It's not the kind of house I want," she said, "but we can live in it together until we're married. But I like your cat." And she gestured to the cat watching us from the window. I told her to leave and never return. She did leave, but not before telling me that we were going to be together. It was preordained. For the next year I got calls, emails, and love letters every single day. Sometimes she called 10 times a day. At first I tried to tell her she was wasting her time. But it did no good. To her, we were destined to be together. It has been 10 years since this happened. I still get emails from her about once a month. I still get phone calls from her about twice a year. She has never changed her number, so I know now to never answer the phone when I see her number. If I happen to not look, not pay attention, and do answer, she takes it as an acknowledgement that I have feelings for her, and she goes into a burst of mails and emails and small gifts and phone calls. I never saw her as a threat, at least I have never felt threatened. She is just sick in the head. It's very, very creepy. But the creepiest thing about her, in my opinion, is that she is a Harvard-trained medical doctor treating patients.